Turner, and this is the story of how I encountered the unimaginable, a werewolf. It was a summer I'll never forget, spent at my grandparents' old cabin deep in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the chorus of crickets. Little did I know, the woods held a dark secret. I arrived at the cabin late one afternoon. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the dense forest. My grandparents greeted me warmly, but there was a palpable tension in the air. They had lived there for decades, and I could tell something was weighing on their minds. "Jake, be careful if you go out at night," my grandfather warned. "There are things in these woods you wouldn't believe." I shrugged it off as an old man's superstition. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard a distant howl, low and mournful, sending chills down my spine. I told myself it was just a coyote or a wolf, nothing to worry about. The next day, I decided to explore the forest. Armed with my camera and a sense of adventure, I ventured deeper into the woods. The further I went, the denser the forest became. The air grew cooler, and an eerie silence replaced the daytime sounds of birds and insects. I stumbled upon an old, abandoned house, its windows shattered and walls covered in ivy. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take a closer look. As I stepped inside, the floorboards creaked under my weight. The air smelled of damp and decay. Suddenly, I heard a rustling noise from the back of the house. My heart raced as I cautiously moved towards the sound. In the dim light, I saw a figure hunched over something on the floor. It was large and covered in dark, matted fur. My breath caught in my throat as the creature turned to face me, its eyes glowing yellow in the darkness. It was a werewolf, its snarling face twisted with rage. I snapped a picture, the flash illuminating the beast for a split second. It let out a blood-curdling howl and lunged at me. I ran, my heart pounding, branches scratching my face and tearing at my clothes. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of the cabin. I burst through the door, breathless and terrified. My grandparents knew immediately that something was wrong. I showed them the photo, the blurry image of the werewolf, barely discernible but unmistakable. Their faces grew pale. "We need to leave," my grandfather said sternly. "Now!" We packed our things and left the cabin that night. As we drove away, I could see the dark silhouette of the werewolf watching us from the edge of the forest, its eyes glowing in the rearview mirror. We stayed at a motel in town, too shaken to return home. Over the next few days, I researched werewolf legends and found countless stories similar to mine. People had reported seeing the creature for centuries, always in the same area of the Pine Barrens. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to interview some of the locals in the nearby town. Many of them were reluctant to talk, but I found an elderly man named Mr. Hayes who was willing to share his experiences. He told me about strange disappearances over the years, livestock found torn to shreds, and the howling that echoed through the woods every full moon. One night, when I was a boy, Mr. Hayes recalled, I saw it myself. A beast, half man, half wolf, standing on two legs. It had eyes that glowed like embers. My father told me to run and never look back. We never spoke of it again. The more I learned, the more I realized how deeply rooted the werewolf legend was in the community. It wasn't just a story to scare children, it was a part of their history, something they lived with and feared. Determined to get more evidence, I returned to the woods with a group of friends. Equipped with cameras, flashlights, and a sense of bravado, we set out to find the werewolf. We planned to camp overnight, hoping to capture footage of the creature. As the night wore on, the forest seemed to close in around us. The temperature dropped, and a thick fog rolled in, muffling the sounds of the night. We huddled around the campfire, exchanging nervous glances. Then, we heard it, the same low, mournful howl I had heard before. It was closer this time, and it was followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps crunching through the underbrush. We froze, our eyes scanning the darkness. Suddenly, one of my friends, Mark, pointed towards the trees. "There. Did you see that?" I turned and saw a shadowy figure moving through the fog. It was huge, its eyes glowing yellow. It moved with a fluid grace, its powerful muscles rippling under its fur. We aimed our cameras at it, but the fog and darkness made it difficult to get a clear shot. The werewolf let out a deafening roar and charged towards us. We scrambled to our feet, grabbing our gear and running as fast as we could. The beast was right behind us, its hot breath on our necks. Just when I thought it would catch us, it stopped and let out a howl that echoed through the forest. We didn't stop running until we reached the edge of the woods, panting and exhausted. We reviewed the footage later, but it was too dark and blurry to be of any use. The werewolf remained just a shadowy figure, a terrifying presence that haunted our memories. We never returned to the Pine Barrens. The fear was too great, and the risk too high. I often think about that summer, the encounter that changed my life forever. Some nights, when the wind howls through the trees, I can still hear that haunting cry and see those glowing eyes in the darkness. This is my warning to you: if you ever find yourself in the Pine Barrens, be wary of the Howling Woods. For there are things out there, things that defy explanation, things that will haunt your dreams forever.
My name is David Reyes, and I've spent the last 20 years working at the old Thompson textile factory. Nestled in the heart of a decaying industrial district, the factory is a relic of the past. The building itself is massive, with towering smokestacks and rusted machinery. But it wasn't just the decaying infrastructure that made the place unsettling, it was the stories, whispered among workers, of strange occurrences and unexplained disappearances. I started at Thompson's fresh out of high school, eager to earn a steady paycheck. The work was hard and the hours long, but I didn't mind. It was honest work. However, it didn't take long for me to notice the unease that seemed to permeate the factory. There were certain areas, particularly the basement and the old storage wing, that even the bravest of workers avoided. The first strange incident I witnessed happened during a night shift. I was working the loom, focused on keeping the threads in line, when I heard a faint humming noise. It was almost melodic, like a lullaby. I glanced around, but the other workers seemed oblivious. I chalked it up to exhaustion and tried to ignore it. The humming grew louder, more insistent. I followed the sound, drawn towards the basement door. As I descended the creaking steps, the air grew colder and the humming more distinct. When I reached the bottom, the humming abruptly stopped. I was enveloped in darkness and silence. My heart pounded as I fumbled for the light switch. When the flickering bulb finally illuminated the room, I saw nothing but old, dusty equipment. I hurried back upstairs, shaken but determined to brush it off as my imagination. A few weeks later, another incident occurred. I was working late with a colleague, Maria, when we both heard a scream. It echoed through the empty factory, chilling us to the bone. We raced towards the source of the noise, the old storage wing, which had been abandoned for years. The large double doors were ajar, and a cold draft blew through the gap. We hesitated, exchanging fearful glances, before stepping inside. The room was vast and filled with old machinery and crates covered in dust. In the far corner, we saw a shadow moving. We called out, but there was no response. As we approached, the shadows seemed to dissolve into the darkness. We found no one there, just a lingering sense of dread. We reported the incident to our supervisor, but he dismissed it as a prank or our minds playing tricks on us. The atmosphere in the factory grew tenser with each passing day. More workers reported strange noises, tools disappearing and reappearing in odd places, and the feeling of being watched. The most unsettling was the recurring sighting of a figure dressed in old-fashioned work clothes, often glimpsed from the corner of one's eye but disappearing when looked at directly. One night, during another late shift, a massive storm rolled in. Thunder rumbled and lightning illuminated the factory through broken windows. The power flickered and then went out, plunging us into darkness. We gathered our flashlights and regrouped in the main hall. Our supervisor, Mr. Clark, decided we should check the fuse box in the basement. A group of us descended into the basement, the air heavy with anticipation. The humming started again, louder and more sinister than before. As we approached the fuse box, our flashlights flickered and went out. We stood in pitch-black darkness, the only sound our own breathing. Suddenly, a flashlight snapped back on, illuminating a figure at the far end of the room. It was the shadowy figure from before, standing motionless. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow. We froze, paralyzed with fear. The figure began to move towards us, slowly at first, then faster. We bolted, racing back up the stairs and slamming the basement door behind us. We could hear the faint humming through the door, but it gradually faded away. The power eventually came back on, but the sense of dread lingered. Over the next few weeks, more workers experienced encounters with the shadowy figure. Some claimed to have been touched or grabbed, leaving bruises that took days to fade. The factory's reputation as haunted grew, and many workers refused to take night shifts. I started researching the factory's history, hoping to find an explanation. I discovered that in the early 1900s, a series of mysterious deaths occurred in the factory. Workers reported seeing ghostly figures and hearing disembodied voices. The deaths were never solved, and the factory eventually closed for several decades before reopening in the 1980s. Determined to uncover the truth, I organized a small group of workers to investigate further. We gathered old blueprints, historical records, and spoke to former employees. We learned that the basement had once housed a makeshift morgue during a severe influenza outbreak. Many who died were hastily buried in unmarked graves on the property. One night, armed with cameras and recording equipment, we ventured back into the basement. We hoped to capture evidence of the supernatural. As we descended, the familiar humming began. We set up our equipment and waited in the darkness. Hours passed, and nothing happened. Just as we were about to give up, the temperature plummeted. Our breath became visible, and a dense fog filled the room. The humming grew louder, almost deafening. Through the fog, the shadowy figure appeared, clearer than ever. It reached out towards us, and we felt an icy chill. Our cameras captured the entire event, the figure's eerie presence undeniable. We presented the footage to our supervisor and the factory's owners. They were skeptical but couldn't deny the evidence. They decided to bring in a team of paranormal investigators. The investigators spent several nights in the factory, documenting numerous supernatural occurrences. They concluded that the factory was indeed haunted, likely by the restless spirits of those who had died there. The factory was temporarily closed for a cleansing ritual. Priests, shamans, and paranormal experts performed rites to appease the spirits and cleanse the building of its dark energy. After the ritual, the strange occurrences lessened, but the factory never truly felt the same. Many of us, including myself, chose to leave our jobs. The experience had left a lasting impact, a reminder of the unseen forces that linger in the shadows. The Thompson textile factory still stands, its machines humming with the rhythm of the past. But those who work there now do so with a sense of caution, aware of the dark history that haunts its halls. This is my warning to you. If you ever find yourself working in an old factory, pay attention to the stories, the whispers, and the shadows. For there are things in this world that cannot be explained, things that will haunt your dreams and follow you long after you've left.